Here to help, perhaps, or at least to spend some time with this record and all of its joys, is the great Jon Ronson, author, podcaster, and, as we'll talk about in a minute, in the scene around this very same time. So, Jon, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm very happy to be paying tribute to this fantastic record.
Yeah, so I know you have some thoughts about its summerness or winterness, but do you want to talk just about your relationship with it? And in particular, I mean, you were in music kind of around this same time. Did you know this band? When did you first hear about Belle and Sebastian?
Okay, so, I've got lots of connections to Glasgow and the Glasgow music scene because my wife's from Glasgow. And in fact, before she married me, for years, she was dating Lloyd Cole of the Commotions, who was part of the Glasgow scene. So, I spent much of my life in Glasgow. Every Christmas Day I'd be in a council estate just outside Glasgow where Elaine's mother lived, a place called Cumbernauld.
Could I write a piece about you now that you've made it? About the hours spent the wilderness in your training.
My first memory of Belle and Sebastian was hearing Stars of Track and Field and just loving it. Then I did this weird thing that I sometimes do where I really love one song, but I don't bother going into the rest of the band's catalogue. I did the same thing with Van Morrison for years and years.
And we bonded over that Bruce Springsteen song, Thundercrack.
Thundercrack, yeah. Bruce Springsteen's another one where I thought, okay, I really love these songs, but I feel no urge to dive any deeper. And then you suddenly think, well, what an idiot, because if this song's great, then maybe there's lots of great songs. So that's what happened to me with Belle and Sebastian.
In his blue velour and silk, you liberated a boy I never rated. Now he's throwing discus from Liverpool and Witness.
I remember in 1999, I interviewed Randy Newman at the Bel Air Hotel in Los Angeles, because that features in one of his songs, My Life is Good. And he said to me, what new music are you listening to? What should I be listening to? And I said, what about Belle and Sebastian? And he kind of scoffed and said, I've known about them for years. And he quoted Stars of Track and Field. And now he's throwing discus for Liverpool and Witness. And he kind of laughed about how much he loved that line. And it is a great line. Witness is this town just outside Liverpool. And you just don't hear Witness in a song. Liverpool, you'll hear in a song, but not Witness. It's very niche. It shows that Stuart Murdoch was really getting into, athletics back then.
And looking at maps while shut into his room in his bedroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's another moment in that song where you know just how kind of educated Stuart Murdoch was about that world. He says, and now he's doing business.
Yeah.
Throwing discus for Liverpool and Witness, and now he's doing business. And doing business is like the sort of thing that athletics commentators would say on the BBC, look at him, he's really doing business. Yeah. So anyway, so then I didn't really listen to Belle and Sebastian again for ages. And then I kind of slowly got back into them. And then I was giving a talk somewhere in Scotland. By then I was really into, Judy and the Dream of Horses and some other songs. And Sarah from the band showed up at my talk and offered to drive me back to Glasgow. And so I was in the car with her for 3 or 4 hours, and we became firm friends and have remained friends ever since. In fact, I was with her very recently at a park in Glasgow. It may have been Kelvin Grove, I don't know, because I was doing a talk in Glasgow quite recently.
What was the weather like?
It was fine, actually.
Well,
she's now she's involved in those wall of deaths that where motorbikes go round and round. Like a giant. You know what I'm talking about?
Where it's like a circus act where the bikes, they get enough centrifugal force and they can ride on the walls.
Yes,
yeah.
Velodrome,
right?
Yeah, her and a friend of hers built one in a shipyard in Glasgow, and she took me to see it. And
amazing.
She said to me, God, I'm so lucky. I've got to, in my life, be in Belle and Sebastian and also be involved with this wall of death. And it was beautiful. It's like in a disused shipyard. So anyway, through Sarah, I met the rest of the band, and I've seen the band, a million times. And I went to one of their bowling weekends that, I forget what they're called. These sort of...
like the holiday camp, right?
Yeah, like a holiday camp. In I think Minehead, in a sort of slightly sad seaside town in Britain.
Yeah. this is a little bit of a stretch, but I mean, this idea of her velodrome, I love that we're talking about velodromes. It's a project, a sort of audacious project. Belle and Sebastian kind of, I'm curious, Craig, when you first heard about the band, that was kind of the word and the rumor almost and the mystique about it. It was almost more art project than band in some way. I mean, do you remember hearing those? And what is your sense of kind of how that band actually came together?
I remember trying to figure out who the singer was and having a hard time with that and not understanding like who was in the band. They weren't in their photos. They were just like photos of people they knew a lot of the time you saw in their artwork. So I really didn't. There was a sense of them deliberately obscuring that really came to me as the consumer and someone who wasn't like super plugged in. You know, I was getting it in Minneapolis where I lived, and I didn't have access to the NME or anything like that. So there was a mysteriousness to it.
Yeah.
Added to the mystique and the excitement.
Yeah. Mysteriousness. And also there was something kind of almost unassuming about it. Belle and Sebastian, the velodrome is in a kind of disused shipyard where I think they would have built little bits of the Titanic. Mm-hmm. And the rehearsal spaces in places like Glasgow and Manchester and so on were always in these like disused warehouses and so on. So there's something kind of almost unassuming and sort of utilitarian about Belle and Sebastian, like a lot of those bands at the time. And maybe not having their pictures was sort of part of the sort of weird, scrappy, edge of town utilitarianness of it all.
So the story of the band's early days is that they were all kind of kicking around in Glasgow. I mean, in many ways, the story of the early days is kind of a testament to like government funding for the arts. Like all these people were able to just kind of float around and just scrape by and sort of patch into different grants and networks and subsidized housing. And they had the time to kind of build this collective. There's also this element where there's a marketing project as part of a university course, and they basically hold a contest every year to pick one band to then kind of go through the process of marketing and promoting. And Belle and Sebastian threw their hat in the ring with the early songs that eventually I think became Dog on Wheels, right? And this marketing class kind of does their thing, does their exercise, and then it actually starts to get some real attention. That's the lore, that it's like collective and almost by happenstance. And then, as you're saying, you know, the band talked about like, we don't want any promotion, we don't want any press, we don't want any singles, we don't want any press photos. But there's also this moment in that Pitchfork documentary that we all watched. There's two moments in there where Stevie is talking about Stewart, and he says at one moment that he played the first song on, I think maybe If You're Feeling Sinister, and Stewart turns to Stevie and says, "We're going to be rich."
No, Stevie says it to Stewart.
Stevie says it to Stewart. But I was struck by that. There was some consciousness of an ambition, as much
definitely.
as the lore around this band was, we're just a collective that's just kind of like happened to make our way towards finding people's hearts.
I was part of the Manchester music scene just a couple of years earlier, but it was very similar. And, you know, if you ask the Stone Roses or the Happy Mondays or any of those bands, they'd say that the reason why they exist and became successful eventually was because of the fact that you could pay for a rehearsal space for £20 in this, like, you know, asbestos-filled, disused warehouse in a part of Manchester called Ancoats and so on. So it was partly to do with all of that sort of collective living. But at the same time, I hate to say this, but the Thatcher government had set up some sort of thing where you'd get paid a couple of £1,000s for setting up your own small business. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did when I was managing a band. I got like a couple of £1,000s grant from the Thatcher government to set up my own thing. So it was collective, but it was also capitalist at the same time. People were trying to do well out of this. And that line in Get Me Away From Here, I'm Dying, we could either be successful or be us.
Right.
That's definitely there's definitely a sort of double edge to that line. And I think it says that in the Pitchfork documentary. Like he knew he was going to be successful.
Yeah,
like,
we have winning smiles and catchy tunes, and we're photogenic. Yeah.
So when he says you could either be successful or be us, that's kind of self-deprecating. They knew they were on the way to being successful.
Think of it this way: you could either be successful or be us. With our winning smiles and our hands, with our catchy tunes or worse. Now we're photogenic, you know.
There seems to me, when I was watching the documentary and thinking about how they come together, you know, they were all at an age where I think a lot of them, my guess is, had their own songs, had their own music. And I think when you're, you know, really young, you're like, I'm going to be the guy. And then, you know, your friend says, well, I've got these songs. Will you play bass in my thing? And it's kind of like, well, I will, but I'm going to have my own thing too. Maybe you could play bass in my thing. But there seems to be like a, you know, I think Stevie is the one who talks. He's kind of resistant to joining.
Yeah.
Because I think they want to create space for their own thing. But it seems to me the songs are so good that it's like, oh, I better be a part of this.
Yeah.
You can really imagine, because they were picked to be a sort of college project, like how can you market this record? And you can imagine that most of the records that were possible picks would have just been terrible. And then suddenly there's this collection of songs which were like amazing, like, you know, impossibly amazing.
I mean, Stevie says, right, I heard these songs and I thought, oh, this is Bob Dylan, this is Paul Simon level stuff. And Stevie, I mean, I think his influence is huge, especially I think as the band has gone on. I mean, he has a real deep musical wall to draw on, but for him to kind of take a step back and say, okay, I think I'm going to hitch myself to this Stewart guy.
Yeah. I have one criticism re-listening to the record, but I always think it actually when I listen to the record. The one criticism I have is that they recorded, because it was all part of a college project, recording both Tiger Milk and If You're Feeling Sinister. It was all done very, very quickly. And there's something great about that. Like, it's very alive listening to those records. But there's also kind of mistakes. I don't know if you agree with this. I think there's a couple of mistakes. One is what Stevie says in the documentary, but he actually said exactly the same thing to me when I met him one time. We hung out in Sundance together because my movie Frank and their movie was premiering at the same time. So I spent a couple of days with them at Sundance. And Stevie said to me that the one thing that bugs him about Judy and the Dream of Horses is that there's a moment when there really should be a kind of big rock out guitar solo. And Stewart didn't want it. And so we turned the faders all the way down. And now there's no guitar solo at all. And actually, Stevie's right. There should have been. And when they play that song in concerts and it gets to that bit, people love that big rocking guitar solo.
Shoulder saying everything when you talk. If you're ever feeling blue, then write another song about your dream of horses.
So that was an example. And also I think Sarah's background vocals in some of the songs are mixed incredibly low too. So I think partly because of the speed by which they did it, there was a couple of like mixing issues. It's a small criticism because I think there's something incredibly sort of alive about that record.
It does speak to the way it came together in this sort of college, you know, the funding and all that. I was surprised when I watched the documentary that they say, okay, so we go into the studio. It's a nice studio.
Yeah.
I mean, most bands' first records are recorded in a much dumpier place, you know, like it's big. There's a big live room, you know, it looks like they were set up to succeed that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And they acknowledge it. And then they had a sort of dedicated engineer, right? The house engineer who ends up kind of working with them. So they record the Tiger Milk sessions and these basically at the same time. Tiger Milk is 3 days. This is 5 days. Craig, what's your reaction when you hear that this came together in 5 days?
I mean, it's incredible, but it's also testament to songs and performance being everything, and overdubs, you know, coming in well rehearsed. A lot of the music that is the most timeless comes in these kind of situations, people really knowing their parts and having a plan.
One thing I love about Judy and the Dream of Horses is that it's a song about school. And some of the instruments are instruments that you play in school orchestras. So there's like a glockenspiel, there's a xylophone, I don't know.
Judy never felt so good except when she was sleeping. Judy never felt so good except when she was...
There's recorders. And I don't know about in America, but in Britain, the recorder is such a school instrument. Yeah. So I really love that about that song. Get Me Away From Me, I'm Dying. You know, I went to see that Oh Mary when it was off Broadway. It's like
I saw that too, yeah.
Right, huge Broadway smash. And at the end, they do some show tunes and they put Get Me Away From Here, I'm Dying in the end montage. And I thought, God, this song's really entered the fabric of...
Yeah. But Get Me Away From Here, I'm Dying also has that sort of musical theater, like thesis statement approach to it, right? I mean, it is the song that is most kind of self-referential about being in a band. Nobody writes them like they used to.
Sure, but I could only make you cry with these words. write with these words.
I kind of like when a band does it. I like when it's sort of tucked into the middle of an album. I don't know if he was doing this intentionally, but it just builds that mythology that we were talking about. These folks are up to something intentional about music.
But going back to the Stars of Track and Field, because that was very much my Belle and Sebastian gateway drug. And I think it was that line, and now he's throwing discus for Liverpool and Witness. Like if there's a moment when I fell in love with Belle and Sebastian, it was probably that. So funny that Randy Newman, who I've always thought of as like my kind of thought doppelganger. Like I made a documentary about him once where I said that every thought I've ever had has already been had by Randy Newman. It's a documentary called I Am Unfortunately Randy Newman, about being marginal.
Stars of track and field you are. Stars of track and field you are. Stars of track and field are beautiful people.
Okay, there's something about the idea also learning in the documentary that Stewart's a runner is kind of interesting because he's also, so much of this is centered around his illness. But I guess that's, the wistful thinking of wanting to run again and looking at athletes and saying, look at them healthy. There is, Chariots of Fire. There's like this sort of romance around, I think, English track and field stars, right? I mean, I think that's something he taps into. I don't know everything about it, but there's something evocative there.
You're right. Back then, Steve Ovett, Steve Cram, I wouldn't say that like British British runners are constant, folk heroes in Britain, but there was a period back then when they were. I think they were doing really well in the Olympics. There was Roger Bannister who ran the first 4-minute mile. Right. He's a kind of legendary figure in Britain. I was actually walking through Brighton quite recently on a speaking tour, and there's a statue for Steve Ovett on Brighton seafront where presumably he would run up and down.
I just want to throw in there that if you want a Stuart Murdoch song about running that's better than Stars of Track and Field, Loneliness of the Middle Distance Runner is my favorite Belle and Sebastian song. If I was ever on Desert Island Discs, I think it's a lock for me to take onto the desert island. I mean, it is one of the key songs in my life. And so that's maybe part of why I don't like Stars and Track and Field as much either, because I'm like, there's another song about running over here that's 10 times better. But there you go.
This is one of the songs right away, first song on the album, and then the next song, Seeing Other People, that he does, there's sort of a frank sexuality to it, and frank, but maybe sometimes ambiguous as well.
Oh, yeah.
That I think is a hallmark of, and something that grabbed me. When you think 1996, 97, when this came out, and when I was looking at other records that came out that year, it was maybe like big guitar rock was starting to go away. I mean, like Odelay, Babek, DJ Shadow introducing, Stereolab's Emperor Tomato Ketchup, Tortoise, the big Tortoise record, Millions Now Living. I feel like indie rock was maybe saying like getting less macho.
Yeah.
Or maybe be embracing non-guitar things, non-big guitar things. Some of that content grabbed me right away. And also, kind of subverted some of the stuff that come before it.
Mm. They remind me very much in the mid-'80s, just before Manchester hit and then grunge, there was obviously a really big, it was called C86. Yeah. There were bands like Tallulah Gosh and the Monochrome Set and James, obviously the Smiths. I was managing a band at the time called The Man from Del Monte, which was very much in that genre. And I often think that Belle and Sebastian sort of fulfilled all the potential that Tallulah Gosh and the Monochrome Set and James even and the Man from Del Monte had. Like they came along 10 years later doing pretty much the same thing and just being really good at it. Like Tallulah Gosh had one great song. Belle and Sebastian has, 50 great songs. Yeah.
So I do want to talk about the way that Stewart seemed to be talking to other shut-ins and who really connected with them. But I got to pour a little Cold Water on Stars Track and Field. I mean, I don't know. I love the song. Obviously, I love the song. I love that there's like a late horn, you know, which Sebastian does a lot, but it's like one of my favorite tricks in music is just bring a horn in, you know, right towards the end. But like the song has always bugged me. The like repetitive chorus and build up, it just feels a little like, I don't know, like dirgy and not very satisfying. And then I know you talked about some of the rhymes and the lyrics, but like rhyming liberated with rated or knowledge with college. I'm just like, we could do a little better than this. She had the knowledge to get into college has always just like stuck in my craw for whatever reason.
Yeah. It's funny, those criticisms, I actually have about a couple of the other songs on the record. Yeah. I feel that way a little bit about Mayflower and also Fox and the Smoke. Mayfly, sorry. Yeah. They both feel slightly dirty to me. But actually, in preparation for this, I was thinking about my relationship with songs because it took me probably I first heard Stars of Track and Field in maybe 1998. And it was only yesterday I realized what the song was about, which was a sort of wishful thinking about the days when he was a runner and sort of daydreaming about being a runner again. And that made me think about my relationship with music in general, which is that, and I'm really curious, I've never actually verbalized this out loud, so I'd be really curious to know what you think about this. I can listen to a song for years before I figure out what it's about. I always feel like I listen to music partially. I never listen to the lyrics. I never try and make sense of the lyrics. It can take me years. I mean, unless it's a song that has a very obvious meaning, like, I don't know, Glory Days or something, it can take me years. So instead what happens is I just sort of feel the song and then a fragment of a lyric will like emerge from that feeling and I'll love that lyric. And now he's throwing Discus for Liverpool and Witness being a good example. And then it sort of vanishes down again. And I always sometimes wonder, am I listening to music like wrong? Am I listening to music in a slightly, I don't know, like brain damaged way that I'm getting a sort of feel of it and I'm getting fragments of it, but not the whole thing? Or is this the way that people do tend to listen to music? Greg?
I suspect that everyone listens to music slightly differently. I certainly listen to it differently than you. If I identify like, oh, this is a song that I've heard 3 times and it's nice, I'm getting on the computer and pulling up the lyrics so I can read along with it and figure out exactly what's being said and what it means. I personally need to know that immediately. But I do know that I have all kinds of friends that say, oh, I don't listen to the lyrics at all. Never, it's just completely melody. So I think that we're all on some sort of spectrum with that.
I remember distinctly my junior year of college listening to Van Morrison and having this moment where I thought to myself, I think I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out what this song means and feeling like that was such a gift, not feeling frustration by that. And I feel that same way about, a lot of my favorite artists. I mean, we talked about Paul Simon recently, and I feel that same way too. And the getting closer to understanding what it means is just as satisfying as the getting further away. And it's always like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And I just like embrace that. It's, I think, my favorite experience with music. Yeah. And I think the best lyricists often kind of, the more you spend time with them, the more opaque they become.
Yes. And actually, if you listen to a song for years and you don't think about what it's about, and then suddenly it hits you years later, that can be an amazing feeling. Yeah. That happened to me with, speaking of Paul Simon, that happened to me with the song America. Suddenly hearing the lyric, I'd heard it a million times, but suddenly hearing the lyric, Kathy, I'm lost, I said, though I knew she was sleeping. I'm empty and aching and I don't know why. Suddenly realized that this is a song not about the kind of, joys of traveling through America, but the pain of travel, the sort of existential pain of the whole thing.
But Craig, I saw a show of yours recently where you talked on stage about realizing that a lyric might be about something for the first time 15 years after having written or whatever. And musicians do that too, right? You write the song and then it exists outside of you and then you have a relationship with it in the same way that other people listening to it have,
100%. Right? And, sometimes you're going at a feeling and you might not, the songwriter might not always know why it's there, and it may reveal it to themselves years later. And that's certainly happened to me. Yeah. It sounds right when you're writing a song. You're like, this line just is right. But then maybe a decade on, you have the perspective. It's like, wow, that's why it sounds right.